Good evening, everyone. It's 7 o'clock, so we're just about to start the meeting. Welcome to this night's Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting. I'm Councillor Lauren Wall. I'm the chair of this committee. As we have many members of the public present tonight who may not have been present at call-in meetings before, I thought it might be helpful to explain what will happen tonight. Councillors have called in the Cabinet decision, Improved Early Help Offer and Early Help Strategy 2025 to 2028. The lead councillor who made the call-in will present reasons for the call-in. The Cabinet member will have an opportunity to respond. After this, the committee can ask questions of the Cabinet member and the member who called in the decision. Once questions have ended, the committee will have a chance to debate the merits of the call-in, and then we'll make a decision on how to proceed. There are two options. One is to uphold the decision, and the second is to ask the Cabinet to reconsider the decision. It is important to remember that the committee cannot overturn the decision, only ask Cabinet to reconsider. Now, I know that this issue has generated a huge amount of interest and passion within the community, but I would like everyone to remain respectful, particularly when the Cabinet member is speaking. Respect and hearing different opinions, even if you disagree with them, is an important part of democracy. So please, I ask you, no heckling, shouting or disruption of the meeting. So with that, we'll move on. I believe all members are present. There's nobody attending virtually. The meeting is being recorded on YouTube. So we'll move to item 1. Apologies for absence and substitutions. I believe we have 2 apologies from Councillors Johnson and Wesson, and 2 substitutions for them, Councillors Munir Ahmed and Varleen Alexander. I believe there are no declarations of interest. Is that correct? I believe there are no matters to be considered in private. So we'll move on to item 4. Can we approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of April 2025? Councillor Hamidi.
Sorry, Chair, I was present at the meeting, but my name's not on the minutes.
With that correction, can we approve the minutes? Thank you. So we'll move on to item 5, which is the call-in decision of the Improved Early Help Offer and Early Help Strategy 25 to 28. I would like to invite 2 public speakers. We have Claire Wellesby from Save Ealing Children's Centres.
New councillor first.
Oh, so we'll invite Councillor Malcolm to speak first, and then we'll have the 2 public speakers come up. Thank you. So Councillor Malcolm, would you like to start? Thank you. You have got 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Since the plans to consult on the children's centres, parents around the borough have suspected cuts were in the offing. When the budgets were baked into the budget a number of months ago, it seemed obvious what was about to hit us all. There were 1,500 respondents, which is a far higher rate than you would normally expect, but the consultation changed partway through when errors were spotted in its implementation. Many people said effectively it's a sham. 2,100 signatories to the Save Ealing Children's Centres petition shows this is a real important issue that many people borough-wide are concerned, and we should not ignore those parents, some of those who are in the room today. Tonight, hopefully, we can be wise and stop these closures from taking place by sending it back to Cabinet. Ealing Children's Centres have been remarkably successful at transforming the outcomes of many disadvantaged children, providing critical services. The words of one mother, which I think you've all received an email, where one mother said, "My daughter is a SEND child, and being at Hathaway Hungry Caterpillars has been the best decision that I've ever made. My daughter started Hathaway, she was shy and could barely talk. She has progressed so much." That's just one of many emails where a similar story has been said. They're well run and they should be continued. There are many arguments for doing that. One is a value for money one, which the Cabinet report didn't seem to talk about. An independent and recent academic research showed that for every £1 of investment in children's centres, £11 of benefits to children who attend them. And our job as councillors, I would say, is not just to look at what is happening this year or next year for those children, but what will happen in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years when they may be at university. We need to make sure that we invest in our children, and these are a great way of doing that. They've succeeded so far. In terms of the outreach, only half of the respondents thought that the suggested religious buildings were appropriate and the other half inappropriate. There are no details in the Cabinet report about the workings out on how you can increase the reach. You're going to lose a whole lot of reach when you close centres, a significant number of children's centres, but there is no real way you can see how that's going to scale up after then. You've also got the gap in service to provision. So when you close these children's centres down, why are you closing them before you've implemented the alternatives to those? So that seems you're doing the things the wrong way round. You've got the element of privatisation in here, which was spotted. And it does seem strange that the council is wanting to involve a profit-making private company to run what essentially is a childcare business, which currently is run very well at the repurposed centres. So I don't believe that is actually a good policy for those children and parents. You've got the other element of travel times. Closing the children's centres will mean more people will have to travel longer distances. One mother...
Councillor Malcolm, can I ask you to wrap up now, please? 3 minutes has been passed.
I will, yeah. I'll say, in summary, Chair, I think these proposals would be the death knell of the children's centres. Many parents, many children, many vulnerable children will be affected, and the Lib Dems therefore urge the Scrutiny Committee to send it back to Cabinet to reconsider, because all of the facts are not presented at that Cabinet report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Malcolm. Can I invite Claire Wellesby up, please, next? No, there's 2 people down to speak tonight. There was a third person, but she did receive an email communication from me. Okay. No, it's the 2 of you, because as I did explain, I mean, you've come about one very small part of the strategy, which is the Hathaway Centre. Is that correct? Yeah. So that. So, sorry, what's your name? Yeah, no, you came to speak about Hathaway Children's Centre, just about the particular closure of the day nursery there, the Hungry Caterpillars. And we did explain that that's just one part of the strategy and the decision hasn't been taken yet. There was another email. Yeah, can I invite Claire to come up, please? Can you just introduce yourself, Claire, and say where you're from? Thank you.
I'm Claire Wellesby. I'm part of Save Ealing Children's Centre Group. I'll start. I bring 15 years of experience leading on children's centres in Ealing from 2006 to 2021. Prior to this, 15 years working in and then leading provision for children with additional needs and disabilities, SEND, in another local authority. Returning to this experience working for Ealing Services for Children with Additional Needs between 2021 and 2024. This knowledge and experience, particularly in Ealing, gives me some expertise into how this decision will not achieve its aim of improving early help for children pre-birth to age 5 and their families. The consultation analysis report states that the vast majority of parents and responders state the reduction in children's centres from 25 to 12 would have a negative effect. As a result, 3 children's centres have been reprieved, but without recalculating the savings or showing how aware these will be made. It's not us just that think this is a wrong decision. According to the Institute of Fiscal Studies in May 2025, Sure Start Children's Centres have a remarkably long-lasting positive impact that's on health and educational outcomes of children who had access to a children's centre. That's already been mentioned. Regarding proportionality and openness, although all the criteria for scrutiny are relevant, the declared outcome is to improve early help offer with a mechanism to close or repurpose half, initially now 2/3 of its children's centres, and to reach more children, identify more need, engage more families, provide more early help, reduce the number of children needing specialist or statutory support, improve outcomes for children. And to do all this with significantly less well-established community bases, with community-based children's centres with even less staffing and less funding, the saving of over over 2 years of 751,000 from an annual budget of just over 2 million is very significant. It's not proportionate, logical, or achievable. Openness. Where to start? There's been no openness about the purpose of the proposal. No supportive data to provide sufficient reason for the only option offered other than doing nothing. No yes or no answers. No equal access to parents for public consultation meetings, with only 4 out of 14 meetings held in children's centres that were proposed to close. What does repurposing mean? Closure described by another name. Through not publishing redacted qualitative text responses. About budget savings published from the start of the consultation, which were only begrudgingly admitted to when challenged at public consultation meetings. No meaningful answers to questions regarding budget savings asked of the scrutiny panel on the 15th of April and the full council meeting the 10th of June. Councillor Joss Backer stated at both meetings the budgets could go up or down subject to need, as in statutory children's services. Did he mean that the children's centre budget could be overspent if the demand was higher? I would be very surprised if councillors would agree to a strategy based on the premise of possible overspends. Children's centre budgets were never overspent. About the freeze of children's centre staff appointments since 2003, currently 15%, or the impact of this is having on reaching children and families. This information was obtained by Freedom of Information requests, as with the detail of children's centre budgets in comparison with other boroughs who have comparative levels of need to Ealing.
Claire, can I?
There are still no plans. Hathaway has already been mentioned, and a double shock to parents. What next as the unwritten plans and strategies emerge? The outreach strategy is not due to be completed until January next year. There's no apparent thought about how this decision will impact on early childhood health officers and offer. And finally, regarding being open and working with the community, the council promotes and connected communities vision, and the invitation sent to work with Save Ealing Children's Centres was declined. Not even an offer to discuss what this might look like. So much for connected to communities.
Thank you,
Please
Claire.
ask the council to review the decision that which will have a negative impact on thousands of the youngest residents in Ealing for years to come.
Thank you, Claire. Can I invite Clara Craber from Southall Community Alliance to come up and speak, please? Can I invite Clara Craber to speak from Southall Community Alliance? Okay, can you come up, please? No, we've had a lot of representations about Hathaway Children's Centre at the Hungry Caterpillar. We're aware of the issue, but there's no decision been made on that yet.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to read Emily's speech in that case. So thank you very much.
You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I've been an Ealing resident for 15 years. I have voted in every council election. I've paid tens of thousands of pounds, probably more, in council tax. But more importantly, I am the father of a wonderful, happy 2-year-old boy who has benefited immensely from the services provided at Hathaway and Jubilee Children's Centres. I'm saddened by this whole process from the very beginning, regardless of the council's intention. The consultation has been a mess. Parents have felt ignored, dismissed, and at times outright lied about the reasoning behind all of the closures. And I urge the council to reconsider its decision. First point is the respect for human rights and equalities. We became parents a little later than planned, and whilst there are many positives, it's not come without challenges. We don't live near either of our families. Our support network is good, but spread across the country, so we look after our little boy with very little day-to-day practical support. In this context, I can't stress enough how vital the services delivered, particularly at Hathaway, but across all children's centers, have been in helping my family with care, compassion, and companionship, not just for my son, but for my wife and I. From the moment we knew we were having a baby in a very difficult operating environment, we've received great support from everyone in the building, midwives, practitioners, reception staff. They deserve to be recognized and not to be shut down. Closing the center will be a huge loss to us. I don't believe the council has truly considered the negative impact the proposed challenges will have on the families that currently use the services. It feels as though we aren't quite good enough and are being dumped in favor of some other mythical people who are somehow more worthy. And in terms of human rights, what I was hoping to speak on in my time is that this is a violation potentially of the Human Rights Act, which protects the right to private life and family life. And as this statement has so aptly described, children's centers provide an essential service that allows people to develop and maintain ordinary family relations, and closing down these centers threatens to undermine that right and potentially leave the council vulnerable to future legal challenge. But I'll continue reading their statement. The consultation process seems to have been unfair and flawed from the start. There were no plans to consult other than the proposed closures and the cuts. Many parents have felt that information is being held back and that the council has had dishonest intentions from the outset. When new decisions were made, we heard in June, for example, to close the Hungry Caterpillars nursery based at Hathaway Children's Centers. These were seemingly made behind closed doors with no regard to the 60 families that would be affected by this decision. This was also not consulted on. At the same time, the consultation results surveys were also disregarded. An overwhelming number of parents and everyone who responded to this said, or I think it was 74% said that the closures would negatively impact them. Yet this decision and the consultation's results were not at all considered in the decision to ultimately move forward with this process. But I'll continue. Surely the council must accept that it is overreaching here and contradicting.
Can I ask you to wrap up, please,
Why
Clara?
remove a revenue-generating commercial enterprise? This makes no sense. Overall, I would just summarize this by saying I really implore the council or the scrutiny committee here to consider sending this decision back to council. It is causing a devastating impact on the community, as evidenced by the tremendous number of people who have taken time out of their evening to come and have you listen to them. Sadly, I've had to speak for several of us tonight. I wish I'd been able to speak more to what our charity does, but all I can say is the best thing to do would be to send this back to council so that we can actually have more collaborative, longer process that really reconsiders the early help process and co-produces a better.
Thank you, Clara.
Vision.
Can I now invite Councillor Josh Blacker and Robert South and Helen Harding up, please? And could you introduce your, well, Councillor Blacker, could you respond to the call in first? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And it's been a while since I was at OSC. I think last time was on screen when I was a chair during the pandemic. The question we have is, how do we best organise our services to meet the different needs of the communities within our borough? It's not a question unique to children's services, but that's a question we have to answer. We have rising demand for our statutory services. We've got increased numbers coming to the front door of children's services. Education and healthcare plans are increasing by about 10% a year. We have higher numbers of children in need, higher numbers of child protection plans. And all of that not just costs the council a lot of money, the taxpayer a lot of money, it is also not the best thing for those children to have. It doesn't necessarily produce the best outcomes. In that context, we have to look at whether our early help services can do more for more families at an earlier stage to stem that growth and give our children ultimately a fairer start in life. We also know that rising demand is not seen equally across the borough, and that many of the families referred to statutory services have not previously accessed our early help services, children's centres in particular. What that means is we are missing children and families who need our help. We are waiting for them to come to us for help, and when they do not come, we are waiting for them to reach crisis point before we can intervene. However good our outcomes are for looked after children, if we can prevent family breakdown, we must. When we do not help a child with school readiness, school becomes harder for them, for their teachers, for their families, and they suffer as a result. Those are the problems we face today with our services as they are. The status quo is that some of our families, some of our communities are underserved. They are not as served well as they should be. As I said at Cabinet last month, and as the report made clear, we have excellent staff who deliver a fantastic service. But given we need to increase our reach, we need to consider whether the way that service is currently delivered is the best way to do so. That's why we consulted on moving to a refreshed model of early help, one less reliant on children's centres buildings and moving more into the community. We know that community-based services work, and if you would like, we can run through some case studies a little later. But with our resources as they are, we cannot readily expand in that way. Change, if we are to improve our prevention work, is unavoidable. We want a more comprehensive, integrated service across our 7 towns, in line with the original Short Start vision. But that's not possible when our resources are spread across a very high number of centres used inefficiently. Consolidating our building-based delivery means we can improve our offer within those buildings while freeing up resource to take into the community close to the families we are currently missing. The original proposal was to consolidate into 12 key centres, and where we no longer needed them, we could use those buildings for other services for children and families, whether that be expanded childcare or additional send places. The feedback on the use of some of those community spaces was very strong, and we recognise that. And while we do need to use those spaces to reach the families who are not currently accessing services within children's centres, we appreciate the feedback that we got, and we brought back a revised proposal. Clearly, we will continue to assess for suitability those venues we are going to use, make sure they're safe and accessible. But in response to the steer we got, we agreed to the recommendation to retain 3 further children's centres at Dormers Wells, Pets Hill and at Jubilee to ensure those parents have a choice on how to access our services. That gives us a portfolio of 15 children's centres, London's largest network. Each of our towns will be served by at least 2 children's centres, except Perivale, where we have proposed no change to the existing 1 centre. We'll also then, by delivering more efficiently, be able to increase the number of sessions being delivered in every single one of our borough's 7 towns. This is not, as some have suggested, a reduction or a cut in our services. It is an increase in our services delivered through a different model than we currently have. So that's a bit of an overview. In terms of the consultation, there was significant publicity on the council's media channels and at children's centres, ensuring wide awareness. And I think the volume of response we got, 2,300 odd responses to the survey, bears witness to a very successful campaign. In addition to the feedback we got, we put in an additional online consultation event to ensure inclusivity. The in-person events were held where capacity allowed and where timetable allowed. We didn't want to disrupt our activity, and in fact, the attendance of up to 90 at one of the events suggested we did need to use the larger venues as we could. It was an open, transparent and inclusive consultation, and I am satisfied that we've taken feedback into account as far as possible. The savings proposed are predicated on running a more efficient estate, and the prevention work will also contribute to longer-term financial sustainability for children's services overall. Budgeted savings are only that. Should we not meet savings targets, we will find alternative savings or mitigations elsewhere in the budgets in the same way we manage our in-year pressures. And on the issue of this IFS report, as I said at Cabinet, it is precisely because we know the value of the Short Start services that we want to move more of our services into an integrated model. But when you read the report, it talks about an access distance of 2.5 kilometres to a centre, a pram pushing distance of 2.5 kilometres. The Uxbridge Road through Ealing is about 10 kilometres long. If we were solely to focus on what that report implied, it would imply that we would only need 2 centres across the Uxbridge Road to cover a distance of 10 kilometres. Clearly, I think we have, with 15 centres, a more comprehensive proposal.
Could I ask you to sum up, please, Councillor Blacker?
Of course. If I can just very quickly address the point on Hathaway and the nursery in particular, which is separate to the children's centre we're discussing tonight. We have not asked the nursery to close. There's an early indication, as with all of our sites, of what we might be able to repurpose those sites into to deliver those additional services. There's early conversations that we've had with the nursery in terms of what that site might look like. No decisions have been made. We have not asked the nursery to close. And I hope that answers that question. Subsequent to implementing the decision, we will look at proposed use of all those sites and take those decisions when appropriate.
Thank you, Councillor Blacker. So I'm going to open up now for members of the panel to ask questions of either Councillor Malcolm, who called it in, or Councillor Blacker, who's the portfolio holder. Can I just begin with asking you, Councillor Blacker, what do we mean when we talk about more integrated services?
Yeah, so as I'm sure you know, at some of our centres currently, we're open for perhaps one session a week on a Wednesday or a Thursday morning, depending on availability. That's not an integrated service that delivers a lot of activity. It's one that delivers perhaps one session a week. I don't know if Helen Harding might give a kind of a bit more of an example of the kind of integrated service we're talking about. But you know, at the moment, if a centre is open for one session a week, it's not worth housing, for instance, sending someone to come and talk to families about housing options that might improve their lives as well. So Helen, if you wanted to.
Helen, can I just ask you to introduce yourself, just for the benefit of members of the public and those watching on YouTube, please? Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Helen Harding, Assistant Director for Early Help and Prevention. In terms of the integrated model of practice across the children's centres, we currently have co-location within our children's centres with health partners and other partners. However, we don't have an integrated offer. They are two different things. So in order for us to work in an integrated way, we need to be in the spaces in terms of a more of a 9 to 5 offer, where we are working alongside one another as opposed to passing each other over the threshold of that building. So moving forward with the recommendation of 15 centres from 25, we would be looking at having our centres open for longer periods of time during the day. We would have staff available in the centres, children's centre staff, practitioners who deliver on the early help offer, alongside our partners, health, midwifery, early start, etc., to work in that integrated way with that model of working with the family in a holistic way. We know through the consultation, families had felt that was disjointed, that health services weren't aware of where children's centre services were being offered, and there is a disjoint in that practice. So through the new model, it would be more integrated as well as co-located.
Thank you, Helen. I have Councillor Moffat first, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I think it's probably very important to say that Councillor Malcolm, I'm not sure your hyperbole at the start saying this was the death knell of children's centres is particularly constructive, or indeed very responsible when it comes to the parents that are here very concerned about children's centres and access to them. And I hope you will withdraw that remark. In the same line, Councillor Blacker, we heard from a parent who's sadly now left with her speech being read, how important access to children's centres is. And I'd be interested to hear from you how this decision will actually impact access to children's centres.
Thanks. So as I said, a number of our centres and those that we're looking to repurpose aren't open very often. You know, if you want to access some of our centres on a Wednesday morning, your closest one isn't open. You already have no access to that children's centre, and certainly not to the kind of integrated offer locally that we would want to see. But additionally, it's not just about the building, right? So when we talk about those fantastic staff delivering fantastic services, it is the staff who are building relationships with parents. It's the staff who are helping those parents get better at what they do and build relationships with their children and prevent those family breakdowns escalating. It's not the building that matters, right? It's not the bricks and mortar, it's the staff. And there are lots of people who are missing out, who don't come to our children's centres, who may benefit from that work. And actually, by moving our services from our buildings into community spaces, working with community groups who can help put us in touch with different parts of the community, we can improve access in that way. So actually, we do reach those people who need our help the most. And when you look at some of those accessing statutory services, only about 25% of the families accessing statutory services ever came to a children's centre. That's a huge number of issues that we could have helped prevent by improving access in the community, closer to where people are. You know, we've always talked as an administration about doing things with the community and not doing things to the community. And actually, it's a bit patronising to say the community have to come to us. to access our services. It is our responsibility to go and meet them where they are, and that's what this proposal does, alongside strengthening that building-based offer in the way that Helen has just outlined.
Thank you, Councillor Blacker. Councillor Conti next.
Thank you. It was just sort of building on about the people who aren't accessing the children's centres at the moment. I know in the report it says that it was very difficult to capture their voices. So I just wonder how you've worked out that this is what they want, if you haven't spoken to them. You've mentioned 25% only of the people that access statutory services have used children's centres. So have you spoken to the other 75? Have you, if they access and they're in touch with the council, have you actually spoken to them and asked what they want? Is it the fact that these centres were not co-located with other institutions or other community services that stopped them using it in the first place? Because there isn't anything in the report which actually says what this group of people actually want. And I just want to know how you've come to this conclusion without, and if you have, what information you've used, because it's not detailed in the report. The second thing is, you mentioned about buildings aren't important. Clearly, obviously, the people inside the buildings are the most important thing. But I think there was a couple of comments a number of comments in the consultation about that these are safe spaces, that people feel safe in these buildings. So they are important. I think it's quite dismissive to say that they're not. And I just wonder, in some of the other locations we propose, like religious institutions, etc., there's comments in here about people wouldn't feel comfortable using those. So I just wonder how you balance those two things out.
Thanks. I'll address the second one, and then the first is a really interesting one. So on the second one, absolutely, we've listened to that feedback, right? We have accepted that many of the people who do access our services would like to see those children's centre buildings retained. Given the resource constraints we have and the fact that we do need to go out into the community and do that outreach work, we can't do that in every single one of our centres, but we have recognised precisely what you've just said, that some people won't feel safe accessing services in certain places. So we've retained 3 additional centres, proposed to retain 3 additional centres, as well as doing that outreach in those venues for people who would feel comfortable doing it. So I think, demonstrating quite clearly that it was an open, an inclusive consultation and a genuine consultation. We could have said, well, no, we've listened to that feedback and we've incorporated it and made those changes. For precisely the reason that people who are not accessing our services did not fill in a consultation is the reason we need to go out and meet them. And we are building very good links with community groups, and I think Helen can talk a little bit more about that. But we do know of families who come to our services, and we know where and when we could have intervened. So I think we can talk about some of the social work aspects of it. But I think, Helen, if you want to talk about building that outreach and access to community.
Thank you. In terms of the consultation itself, we had a high response to the consultation. We had over 2,300 respondents, not necessarily all from families that are accessing the children's centres. We had support from our partners and also from our statutory children's services to promote the consultation out to communities. There was a 28-page analysis report which captures a lot of that feedback. We do also know from working with some of our voluntary and community services, for example, HESNA, so the Holistic Special Educational Needs Alliance, has come and given some presentations at our early years and early help partnership forums, which is our governance structure, speaking into those forums around some of the barriers to accessing services that that we want to work with them to overcome. So there is stigma that can be attached to accessing some services within council properties, such as children's centres, which are very much or can be very much linked to children's social care, and there can be stigmas related to that. And we know from the lady that presented from the Somali community had shared around some of those stigmas, around some of the barriers and an understanding of the service. And we want to work more closely with communities. So we are going into their space. They're currently meeting in a faith space, and we want to be joining with them, sharing what the services are, so families don't feel that they're having to wait to a point they're getting referred into a statutory service, but actually there's a broad early help and universal offer that is available for all of the community to tap into. And it's about how we work with communities in the spaces that they feel comfortable with their lead member within their community to build those relationships. So it is about how we develop our relationships going forward in spaces that communities are comfortable holding those conversations with us.
Helen, just in the interest of time and getting through everybody that wants to ask a question, I'm going to take 2 questions next. So can we have a question from Councillor Gordon first and then Councillor Ball, please?
Thank you, Chair. This is slightly following on from Councillor Moffat's comments about Councillor Malcolm's introduction, somewhat hyperbolic introduction. He talked about privatisation. Could you explain what you mean by privatisation? Are there not many private nurseries on children's centres at the moment? That's my key thing. And also, clearly the debate is, and the questioning, we're looking at service and extension of service provision rather than obsessing about buildings, which your comments made. Could you talk a little bit more? How can we, why buildings over services, which seems to be the thrust of the calling?
On the first point about privatisation, part of that is who is most likely to be motivated to be providing a good service for children and parents. That's why I made that comment. The second one, could you repeat the second one? I think that was about the reach.
Well, it's really your thoughts on why you seem to be prioritising and fetishising buildings rather than appropriate services going forward. Clearly, we know the problem that we are not reaching children, and why buildings over services.
I think Councillor Conti quite rightfully said that people feel safe in certain buildings and not safe in other buildings, but you still need a set of landmarks that people can go to. But there is no reason why you could not have taken this at an earlier stage and said, this is our plan, is to increase the reach and make it more integrated. I've got no problem with that, but you want to use the existing centres that work really well. And then if you do a more integrated service, there is money in the budget. There was a budget amendment only 3 or 4 months ago from my party, which showed you could keep the children's centres alive, and you can use some of that budget to start testing and make some of the integrations that Councillor Blacker refers to, because clearly you're trying to essentially close the centres down now before you've actually delivered what those services will be. You're doing it the wrong way around. It'd be better to hold where you are now and do it the other way around if that was what you're doing, because then you can test to increase the reach in the future and see what works and what doesn't work. But you're now closing the children's centres before you've even provided the alternatives.
Councillor Blacker, you want to come back on that point?
Yeah, just on kind of sequencing and resource. I mean, we know outreach works. We have case studies, so we can talk about some of the work we're doing at Greenford Library. For instance, if you want to hear about the way we know that outreach does work and that we can do it, we just simply don't have the resource to do 2 things at once. We need to take this decision to move to a different model, and then we can start implementing it. And one of the things we want to do is work with the community on that outreach strategy, on how we do that. Because as I said earlier, it's patronising for us to impose a model of outreach. It is far better for us, as Helen says, to listen to members of the community, to talk to them about where they want services delivered. But in order to free up the resource to do that properly, we need to take the decision first. So that's on the sequencing. I don't know if it would be helpful to talk about some of the case studies in terms of the outreach. I don't know, Chair, if you would like to do that now, or
could you?
Yeah, Helen, do you want to talk us through some of the outreach case studies?
Thank you. I think it's important to highlight that we are active within currently within 10 outreach spaces. So we are the model is being tested, and there are families that are accessing services in those spaces. One of the spaces is Greenford Library, which is currently under some refurbishment at the moment. Once that reopens, we will be back to 11 outreach spaces. An example that we have in terms of families that were accessing services from the library, it was 2 new mothers who were accessing with babies aged 7 months and 5 months. They weren't accessing children's centre services at this time, and they attended the outreach music and movement sessions that were taking place within Greenford Library. The sessions offered an opportunity that encouraged parents and babies to connect through music, rhythm and sensory play. Both mothers attended the sessions regularly, and they also completed registration forms. We're happy to complete those and be registered. And then the mothers started to come and access sessions within children centres, such as infant massage sessions, and were supported with some of the bonding and relaxation techniques that intervention brings about. So that's one example where families were accessing a service within the community spaces, weren't accessing the children's centre spaces, but were encouraged through the very experienced practitioners to come in and see what else is available and what other services they have. Another example is through Southall Library, where we had feedback from a parent and they'd been attending the Book Start Story Corner within the library with a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. They were attending these sessions regularly at the library, and like I say, accessing those Book Start Story Corner sessions. Story Corner, along with some other families who were also accessing these, they were given books, puppets, crowns, etc. Very interactive. The children, just to kind of brief it down a little bit, were very interested in the books, and as a result, with one of the books, which was very much around travel, around London, around using the underground, and the families were able to use those books, take the children out and experience some of these spaces and places across London. And again, lots of other engagement takes place within these sessions. As we say, these are delivered by experienced family practitioners who also deliver from the children's centre spaces. So there isn't a dilution in terms of what families can access. They are experienced practitioners, and they're able to update them, inform them of other services that are available for them to access also. So it's just another example where a family was using a library as a space to access services. They didn't come into a children's centre space, they was getting what they wanted from the library. So all of our outreach spaces, we know through the consultation, it was raised around risks within those spaces, but clearly we have families that are happy to access services in those spaces, and there are risk assessments that are completed for any outreach space that we would be using.
Thank you, Helen. I have Councillor Ball next.
Yes, thank you. 3 very, very brief questions, if that's okay, Chair. So the first, all for Councillor Blacker. First one is, in Appendix 5A, we see that, which is the consultation responses, we see that 70% of respondents said that the changes would make it much more difficult to access children's centre services, and 11% said slightly more difficult. So that's 81% of respondents who think the changes would make services harder to access. So in what way have you taken the feedback into account, as you said? Secondly, on the financial side, are you seriously trying to convince us that a £751,000 cut on a £2 million budget in the face of the rising demand that you referred to is an attempt to improve services rather than being primarily a financially driven decision? And finally, the nursery at Hathaway, if these changes, the closures were to go through, you would have a lot of buildings which would be closed, repurposed in your language, and would be looking for attracting private nurseries as one of the ways forward. So could the portfolio holder agree that if these changes go through, that the Hathaway nursery would not need to be closed?
Thank you, Councillor Ball. So in terms of the changes we made, obviously we have amended the proposal from what was consulted on. So we're proposing to retain, or we agreed to retain, 3 additional centres. So obviously we have taken that point about access on board. But again, I'd reiterate that the people we need to be accessing our services more are those in the community, and those, I think, that's the moral obligation we have here, is to go into the community and do more of the outreach that Helen mentioned, find those families with the help of their communities who are not going to come to our centres. And as I've said before, some of those centres that are being repurposed are not open 24/7, 9 to 5, 5 days a week. They are not accessible venues. They're not in the spirit of those one-stop shop integrated services that Sure Start was. And Sure Start, of course, was always about having a hub in the community that you then did outreach from. So I think that is on that. On the finances, I think you kind of get yourself halfway to the answer with your with your next question, Councillor Ball, in terms of those expanded nurseries. And I would remind you that, you know, that those private nurseries that we currently have, and I have a list of them, and there's quite a lot of them, do currently lease the buildings from us as part of their agreements with us. So you may in your head look at those nurseries where we're proposing additional childcare places in repurposed centres and ask yourself whether that saving of 700,000, 350 in each year might not just be not spending money, but actually increasing rental income from properties and therefore having just as much money to spend, Councillor Ball. So I think you're being slightly disingenuous. You know, for many years on this council that when we put savings proposals, they're not always spending less, but also increasing revenue. So you may wish to consider that. And in terms of subsequent decisions, you know, we're looking at a particular decision tonight. We then need to go away and look in more detail once we have an agreement about this decision about those sites that we are repurposing. You know, we've not done a huge amount of work on them. There are early indications because we had not made a decision on the sites that we may or may not repurpose. That was the point of getting to the cabinet report. Once we have that decision, we can then look at the sites and what we do with them. What I would highlight is that, you know, we do know there is a growing need for send places. You know, we came into administration in 2022 thinking we should deliver 72 places over the 4 years. We delivered more than that in the first year, and we've actually delivered over 270. Yes. In those 4 years, and we're now looking at over about 500 in the next 4 years that we're going to need. We need to put them somewhere. The cost of the NMI sector, the non-maintained and independent sector, sorry, for send places, is incredible pressure on our budgets. If we can use our own resources to deliver those places, all the better.
So, Chair, can I come back on the bit where he said I was disingenuous on the middle question?
Briefly then,
yeah,
Councillor.
very briefly. So, as well as being on this council many years, I was for some years trustee of a play group, essentially, you know, and I know that it's very, even though that was a charitable organisation not trying to make a profit, it was really difficult to make the finances work. So isn't it the case that you're not going to get vast amounts of rent from these private nurseries because it's really, you know, they're not the sort of businesses that are making vast amounts of money in the current climate?
We have 11 private nurseries in our children's centre sites that are kind of, you know, operating their businesses as they do, Councillor Ball. You know, and as further funding comes from the Labour government to expand childcare hours, that money will flow into the sector to cover the cost of those childcare hours. So you know, we can look at the business cases on those sites in the future if you would like. The decision before us is actually how to organise our early help services and prevent escalation of need and crisis in families, rather than you know, which nursery goes where.
Thank you, Councillor Blacker. I've got Councillor Rice next.
Thank you, Chair. So I was looking through the call-in itself, and I was actually quite interested in the Likert scale and the claim that you could actually choose to say very satisfied. So I'm just wondering about the thought process that went into deciding how we were going to write questions for the consultation and where that came from. If that is the case, because I didn't actually complete the consultation myself, so I'm not completely au fait with every question. But having said that, I mean, actually reading through the responses to the consultation, they were extremely positive about the service that we've got. The other thing that stood out about it is that people were concerned, as has been touched on by other questioners, the fact that some people actually felt very kind of safe, and they felt like they're in a private space when they were in the children's centre, and they just felt that was appropriate. But it didn't feel as if the going into a religious environment would give them that same benefit. So I'm wondering that, since I've had that conversation with people face to face as well, because people have actually come up to me literally in the street and to talk to me about that and said, well, why weren't you at the consultation to actually hear people's views? And I said, well, I didn't actually know about it, so that's why. But I've tried to take people's views on board on that one. Sorry, excuse me, probably a bit of hay fever. Excuse me. Yeah, so I'm just wondering, what scope is there? I've had a bit of water. I'm very sorry. I've got hay fever here. There you go. So I'm just wondering, what scope is there to perhaps have a look at alternatives to going into religious spaces? For example, schools are so secure, they're very private, and people might feel safe in those environments. So what scope is there to look at that? And I really do apologise, I'm sorry. There's something in this room I've obviously breathed in just now, sorry.
No, I feel pain. Feel your pain with the hay fever. I mean, in terms of safe spaces, I mean, you know, we mentioned religious spaces. I think Helen's already highlighted we're running sessions at libraries, so Dominion Centre Southall, Greenford Library, when it reopens. Also using Friary Park Community Centre, like we're already in other spaces as well. So we are not saying to anyone, precisely for the reasons we've talked about, that we want a single model. We want a flexible model that will work in response to the community that we're trying to reach, right? So precisely that, we're listening to that feedback, and we will work in as many different spaces as we possibly can to reach people in those different spaces. Some people will feel less comfortable in a library, absolutely, they will access a children's centre. Some people don't want to come over the threshold of a children's centre, they'll go to the library, we can meet them there. So all those different spaces, absolutely. In terms of the consultation documentation, I don't know if Helen wants to talk about, but I would remind you that the call-in is about the result of that consultation rather than the ICMD that was back in January and the decision to consult. You know, do we want a more integrated service with an enhanced universal offer and a targeted offer across our 7 towns, or are we happy with the status quo? Helen, did you want to talk about the consultation itself?
Absolutely, thank you. And I think just to pick up on your point around faith spaces, absolutely through the consultation, we had received feedback that for some families, they weren't happy to access a service within a faith space, and they didn't feel that they would be able to be as open and transparent within those spaces. But then, as I spoke to earlier, Hesna had shared how they are meeting in their faith spaces. So again, as Councillor Blacker has just said, it's kind of not one model is going to fit all, and that's why we want to be more diverse in terms of the venues and spaces that we utilise to connect with communities and start to engage them with services. And in terms of going back around the consultation form, we worked really closely with our research and data analytics team, who work with us on all our consultation forms to make sure that they are accessible for communities. We need to think about languages. We need to think about learning difficulties in terms of our forms and how we scope those together to make sure that they are accessible to as broad of the community as we can. We also had support within our children's centre space to support families go through the forms in terms of a hard copy, if families wanted that support, and equally our colleagues in statutory children's social care supported families in completing those forms if they requested that support.
Thank you, Helen. I've got Councillor Ahmed next.
This one, yeah. Thank you. I wanted to know, you said there's no change in Perivale Centre. Are we proposing any additional services there or cutting any services? And the second question is, after this new model, is there any group of parents or any parents who will not be able to access services, or who will be able to access less services than what they are accessing now?
So in terms of Perivale, obviously we're not proposing to change the centre itself, but you know the model envisages an increased number of sessions in Perivale, whether that's at the children's centre itself, alongside that kind of enhanced integrated offer, or indeed in the community in Perivale. So absolutely, Perivale is not only not changing, but will be improved and enhanced in that way. And in terms of the new model and access, I mean, the intention is very much that we have more people accessing our services. Some of them might be accessing it in a different way. They might be people who are new to the service and accessing it for the first time. Some people will find they are still going to the same centres they're used to, and in fact accessing more services within that centre, and finding themselves better served in the new model.
Thank you, Councillor Blacker. I've got Councillor Haley next.
Thank you so much, Chair. So my question is just directed at Helen. You talked about the model practice earlier, and I just want us to move away from buildings, because we keep talking about buildings and how important it is. These buildings supply and offer lifeline to our families that we serve in Ealing. But my question, you talked about partnership. I didn't quite understand what sort of partnership would the new model practice would have. But can you elaborate? You said we already have the services running in the libraries and hopefully community centres and religion centres. Are we going to get the full integrated services that we deliver in children's centres in there? For example, as integrated services, we offer SEND. I want to specifically talk about SEND children and the need of the families. Are we still going to have all that facility, stay and play, where the parents come in for advice, coffee mornings, where parents get help with the DLA application forms, housing advice, and all the services, the health visitors, the speech and language, the OT? Are we going to have all of those services throughout the day, and they will provide for 0 to 5 or 0 to 0 or 0 to 8 years old? Will that facility still include in those particular places? Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of what type of service will be delivered from which venue will vary for its appropriateness. So currently we have sessions running out of libraries that are a stay and play session. Some are, like I said, around Bookstart, and it's more of a reading programme. We have our integrated offer in terms of health within the children's centre spaces, and that's appropriate because they work with liquids, they have to have trunk and floor, they have to have an appropriate space to deliver that. In terms of with the proposal, the idea is that with the 15 centres, we will be working alongside health services within those spaces. There will be experienced practitioners out in the community spaces to support, as you spoke around, in terms of completing forms, accessing other services, support around housing, and tapping into those other services and making those connections for communities. So it will be dependent on the venue as it is now, as the model is now. But what we want to do within the children's centre space is have our doors open for longer. When we've got our doors closed and a family's coming to the centre maybe for a first time, the doors close. Do they ever come back? I don't know. But with the 15 centres and the doors being open consistently, they're safe spaces for parents to come and seek that advice and information. And equally, we'd like to guide families from communities into those spaces for those more kind of sensitive conversations they might want to hold with practitioners in a private space.
Thank you, Helen. I've got one last question from Councillor Mohammed, and then I'm going to ask Councillor Malcolm and Councillor Blacker to sum up, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question is similar to Councillor Haley, but in a different format. And my question is to you, Helen. The services earmarked to be closure, the parents and children in those services that potentially lose out, do you have a plan where to move them? And if you do, can you give us a summary what they are and what the services look like? And my second question is, is there a capacity, whatever they move into? It's not going to be over capacity for those existing services that they're going to move in. Thank you.
In terms of services earmarked to be closed, services aren't earmarked to be closed. Services will be consistently delivered. We will increase our offer through being able to have spaces open for longer. And in terms of how we work with moving some of the services from the current spaces and moving into the proposed 15 centres, that will be that will follow a transitioned process. So we're working closely with our colleagues and have been throughout this process. We have an appreciative inquiry workshop coming up in terms of thinking about what the outcome is and then how we start to move our services into spaces within the existing children's centres, but also thinking about our neighbourhood model with health and how we may work within some of their spaces as well going forward. So we're on a journey in terms of thinking about how we shape services within our assets that we have available to us, but we won't be closing any of our services.
Thank you, Helen. I've got one last question from Councillor Moffat. He says it's a quick one.
Thank you very much, Chair. Councillor Malcolm, we've heard that you're not a big fan of private nurseries, so presumably you would be pleased to see Hungry Caterpillars closed. Councillor Blacker, what support would Ealing Council offer if it was required?
Thanks, Councillor Moffat. Obviously, we would, were any nursery provider to find themselves unavailable to continue on their current site, whether that's on a children's centre or elsewhere, we know that those are really valuable services. We have a team whose job it is to look at childcare sufficiency and make sure that we meet that need across the borough. We have a property services team who can look at the availability of our sites and potentially support to other sites as well. And obviously, should any nursery at any point enter difficulty, we will do our best to make sure that they find another suitable site and that families are supported with that transition.
Thank you, Councillor Blacker. That concludes the questions. So if I can ask Councillor Malcolm to sum up first, please, in 3 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the current plans really have a lack of certainty to gauge the potential of future outreach. There's nothing wrong with outreach, but there needs to have been that work done earlier before you're taking the actual decision that was taken before, because you're doing one action the wrong way around. And I think that pre-work should have been done at a much greater level to give more certainty to parents and children. I think financially, there are many more options than you seem willing to look at. So I mentioned before about the budget amendment a few months ago that allowed all the children's centres to be saved. And then you could also look on top of that some forms of greater outreach. The actual budget, I think Councillor Ball mentioned, was about 750,000 for a couple of years. Over a whole council budget, that's a relatively small amount. There is a lot of wiggle room that you can do there. There are savings in many areas of the council. And I think the great value for money that children's centres bring children and their parents is something we should have focused more attention on, in my view. And I think I would personally want to send this back to Cabinet so they can look at some of those plans in a bit more sort of diligence, a bit more detail. I think also there are a lot of negatives about the current plan. The travel times are going to expand for quite a lot of people because they're not going to have familiarity with any of the new services. And the services that we have now work really well. So why should we really be closing a service that actually just works really well? You know, normally you might expect me to criticise your services. I'm actually saying they work pretty well. So I don't believe, therefore, you should be shutting any of them. And I think we should just go back to Cabinet and let them think about this in a slightly different way and come back at a later date.
Thank you, Councillor Malcolm. Invite Councillor Blacker now, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm slightly disappointed with Councillor Malcolm because he's engaging with a version of this proposal that exists only in his head, because he keeps using this word closure in relation to services. And I think we've been incredibly clear the whole way through in the consultation itself, in the Cabinet report at full council, when I spoke at Cabinet and this evening. We are talking about an enhanced offer. We are talking about the delivery of more services, yes, in a different way than we currently do. In terms of the outreach that Councillor Malcolm thinks should be tested, we have tested it. We know that it works. We can engage members of the community in a space they feel comfortable in and bring them into children's centres at a later date when they are confident working with our fantastic staff. We want to do more of that. We want to do more of that for the people we are currently not serving well. It is all very well us saying that our service is great, but we want that great service to be delivered to more people to whom it will make a real difference. We have children in this borough who are going to school unable to speak properly. And if we meet them and their families at an earlier stage, it will not be upon the teachers to work harder to get them to an acceptable level of education. We will be able to help them earlier to be ready for school and make the most of their education. There are families in this borough who need help parenting, and we want to meet them and offer them that help in a way that means that their family does not break down, that their children do not experience some of the worst situations that they possibly could, that they do not become subject to a child protection plan, or indeed looked after by this authority. Because however well we deliver outcomes for those looked after children, and we are one of the best, it is better for that child not to become looked after in the first place. That is ultimately the end result of not catching people at an early stage, of not delivering the most effective early help service that we can. And if that means we have to get out of our buildings and deliver services from different spaces, that is what we will do. Because I've not heard Councillor Malcolm actually acknowledge that that is the problem we face. He has not acknowledged the pressure that not doing this is putting on our budgets in social care and on the staff in schools and on the high needs block in schools, dealing with the problems that we have not dealt with. And it is our fault that we have not dealt with them. It is not the fault of parents not coming to us. It is our fault for not going to them. And that is what I've asked Cabinet to approve, a plan to go forward into the community, deliver a better service to more people and prevent problems from escalating. Thank you.
Can I say thank you to Councillor Blacker, Councillor Malcolm, Robert South and Helen Harding for all your contributions tonight. You may join the gallery if you'd like and take a back seat there while I invite members of the committee now to start up a discussion. Thank you. We'll start with Councillor Hamidi.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Josh, Helen and all officers for presenting tonight, and Councillor Malcolm for bringing this in. I've not spoken about this publicly, but I do have a niece who has level 2 autism, and ever since she was 6 months old, my mum has used children's services, children's centres, almost every day, taking her to different classes, and this, what is being presented to us, is such a welcome thing for us, because, you know, anybody who's got someone with autism, they know that they need routine, they want to go to familiar places, and having 1 hour is not enough. So my mum would go to a children's centre for a class and they would say, actually, we're not running it today because nobody turned up. That's just for 1 hour. And then the next day she has to go to another part of the borough. It's not consistent. So this integrated service is very much needed. And Councillor Malcolm, you said, from what I've heard tonight, it seems like you have this narrative that you want to run with, but you're not listening to what is being proposed. And reality of it is, you know, it's not the reality of what is being offered with this improvement plans, and spreading misinformation from what we've heard tonight is not the right thing to do. So coming from somebody who's used the service, I very much welcome this, and it is exactly what families need.
Thank you, Councillor Hamidi. We've got Councillor Conti next.
Thank you. So a number of my view is that we should be asking Cabinet to look at this again for a number of reasons. So firstly, I understand the objective of outreach and going to places where parents can be found and children, and that is something that clearly we should be doing. But as a result of that, we're saying that we need to close all these centres. Now, I know there's been conjecture about whether the word closure is right. I know in the report uses the word cease, but it's the same thing. These buildings will not be children's centres anymore. They will be closed, and they will not be operating in the way that they have. In the report, over 1,500 of the parents have said it'll be more difficult for them to access services. So I understand, obviously, we need to reach out to parents who are not accessing services, but the parents who engage in consultation feel that these changes will make it more difficult for them, and I don't think that is right. In terms of my question earlier about capturing the views of parents and young people when they come to statutory services and who haven't accessed children's centres. I know Helen spoke about some of the work the council have been doing in some forums that they'd run, but none of that information is in the report. You have the consultation results, but you don't go into detail about actually what, and all it says in the report is that you haven't been able to talk to these parents. Well, from what you're saying, you have, and some of those community groups, it would have been wise, I feel, to have shared some of that information to reinforce the point that this is the reason why you're making these changes, that actually what they do want is your services in these particular community locations. And finally, you've come with this plan about moving out, but without all the details of exactly what that new model is going to look like. There isn't the detail of exactly where these locations are going to be. I understand that you're in different phases, but I think it would have helped parents, reassure parents, and for young people to know where they're supposed to be accessing the services in the future, if a fully fleshed out plan which included what exactly the future would look like and where that's going to be, because potentially those 1,500 parents may feel that actually it isn't going to be more difficult for them to access service. It may potentially have been easier, but that information isn't there. So I think it should go back to Cabinet and it should be looked at in the round.
Thank you, Councillor Conti. We've got Councillor Ball next.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think what I'm concerned about is the idea that the future is to move out of these kind of obscure buildings, into the community and into a place where people will see the services. But if a parent has a community centre, if a parent has a children's centre at the end of their road at the moment, and that gets repurposed, that gets closed, and there are services provided in a place of worship or a library that's further away, I mean that is a reduction in their ability to access the services. So it seems to be based on a kind of a myth that the children's centres are somehow not in the community. I mean, they are. Councillor Blacker talked about having an integrated service across the 7 towns. Well, the children's centres are across the 7 towns and do have provide an integrated range of services. I think it was interesting the answer to Councillor Haley's question, which was talking about what services would be provided where, and I think it was clear from that actually it would be the model that they're looking at would be a less integrated service, because there were certain types of service provision, certain difficult conversations that would only be happening in the remaining children's centres and wouldn't be happening in the outreach spaces. So I'm really concerned. I mean, as Councillor Conti was saying, it seems like the future plan that's being proposed hasn't been thought through, isn't clear. And I think what really should happen is should go back to Cabinet, and there should be a consultation which offers meaningful options of what we have now and what changes are proposed, as opposed to essentially what we had the first time around. We had a consultation where people said, do you like the services? And people said yes. And do you think it's a good idea to change them? And people said no. So I mean, there was nothing really driven by that consultation. But if you actually planned out properly what is proposed and what services are available there, then you could have a meaningful conversation, a meaningful consultation, and then you could have sound decisions that are based on that. Sorry, I've ranted too long.
Thank you, Councillor Ball. So I've got Councillor Rice next.
Thank you, Chair. I don't really have much to say, so it's a good job too, since I can't really speak very well this evening. But just what I'll say, the one thing that really does stand out from this is the kind of I mean, you could call it misunderstanding. I mean, you could call it kind of not getting quite the right end of the stick. But it just is this kind of belief that somehow we're going to be cutting back on services. That's something that really stands out. But that's not really quite the case. And I'm just actually interested in the kind of information that's going out there and the kind of misinformation that's out there. I mean, one thing I will say is that I'm aware that in my ward, I mean, there's been campaigning going on against the closure of Islip Manor Children's Centre, but we had no intention of closing Islip Manor Children's Centre in the first place. It was never on the list. So why is it that people in my area are convinced of that? And I actually had to last week get my phone out, open up some council papers and prove that it's the case that it was meant to be staying open the whole time. So I don't know if this is really the correct forum to talk about recommendations, but it's something that I will to say that maybe we just need to have another look at how we're communicating the information to the public as to what is happening with this decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rice, and I believe that they are looking at that matter in the Children's Scrutiny panel later on this year, so that will be taken up, but thank you for raising it. So we've got Councillor Moffat next.
Thank you very much, Chair. A lot of what Councillor Ball had to say sounded a lot as I imagine the conversation would have sounded in 1947, the foundation of the NHS. This idea that the closure of cottage hospitals would be inconvenient for some, but overall outcomes, it saved lives. It got better. Healthcare got better because services were made better and more accessible for the people who truly needed them. And that sounds like that is the intention of the policy here today. And you talked about things not being in the community, that this idea that community children's centres are in the community. Well, they are, but if they're not being used by the community, it doesn't matter whether they're physically there or not. And also maybe a question more than it is a speech. I understood the principles that we were here to was to scrutinise decision making, not whether we liked the decision or not. And everything I've heard has been about, oh, I don't like this decision and I would prefer a different one to have been taken. But they're not criticisms of the process through which the decision was taken. And they're not, and we've got these 6 principles that we're meant to be testing this decision against. And I haven't heard a criticism against one of those 6 principles.
Thank you, Councillor Moffat. Councillor Gordon next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to go back to touch on when I was asking my questions of Councillor Malcolm. The fundamentals of the report and of the strategy, the plan going forward is to increase outreach, to improve the service that we're offering. We need to be rethinking how we do things in the borough. We are across a range of council services, and just staying with the current model where we are not reaching all the people that we need to reach. And Councillor Backer said in his introduction, that has to be the key objective going forward. Councillor Ball talks about the building at the end of the road, which is going to close. Well, if it's only open for 1 hour a week for doing one service and then might not be open the second week, that's really not a very good use of resource. Resources are tight. We need to maximise resources to the people that we need to find. This is a service-led programme. It's a service-led strategy, not financial. Councillor Malcolm and Councillor Ball mudding the waters about assessing on the budgets. That's not the reason for doing this. The reason for doing this is for outcomes for our most hard to reach or children who need help and support, who are not getting it at the moment. I also, Councillor Rice just mentioned that the political nature of this. It's clearly political mischief making going on in communities. We have parents and earlier children from a school who think they're going to be closed. They're just not going to. Why have they been led up that garden path? Who's muckraking? Is it the Green Party? I don't know. Is it the Lib Dems? I don't know. Well, yeah, but
Can we have quiet, please, and let the councillor continue?
Rather rude to heckle. So I agree with several of my colleagues. I actually think this is an excellent piece of work from Councillor Backer and the officers, and I actually think we should not be sending this back to Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. Councillor Ahmed next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Chair, a lot has been said. We have been elected to make decisions, and we have been elected to make the right decisions. The hype has been created, and some of the members have gone into the community and created a hype that we are closing centres. I think it's not about the closure, it's about providing services. And the Cabinet member has come up with a fantastic new model it's a need of the time to have a new model where we can provide integrated services better than what it was provided before. And I think the cabinet member should be commended on that, bringing a model that is fit for purpose and fit for this 2025. And I think the residents should be confident that they will understand the benefits of this when they will use the services. In the past, there has been many decisions where hype was created, but then the residents found out that the decisions were right. And this is another decision where I'm pretty sure residents will be happy to see when it is implemented. So I think we should commend this, and we should not send it back to the cabinet.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Haley next.
Some of the points I was going to make, I think Councillor Gordon had already started, but I just wanted to say that I worked in this children's centres to the carers and the families that I hear. I served in children's services before in Ealing, and now I work in children's centre in a different borough. I understand your concerns, but looking at the room now and reflecting on the project and the new model that we're about to take, is still the families that we are trying to reach, and those are not able to speak or voice their concerns, are still not here. So they're still not part of this meeting, which is another sad thing. I'm going to say hope. All I know is from my experiences that they are families who are struggling, who are not here today, who needs the support. And I think the integrated services we need to improve. We need to improve the early help. And I hope, and I share this my concern with Councillor Blacker, Rob and Helen, that we do serve those children and we do serve those families that are in need. And that's all I say. Let's have hope. I know things are looking challenging, and I know when there are new things are changing, it's harder for the family. I represent and I advocate and I work in education for the last 15 years. I work with 10 children. I work with children who've been excluded, and I work with families who are literally on a breaking point, who are kids that are in care because families have not been supported. And I hear your concern, but at the same time, my 4 years experience in Ealing Children's Services, there is a dire need, parents. We have to be very real, and we have to have an honest conversation, and that's what I'm here for, and that's what majority of us are here for. I don't know why Councillor Malcolm had made this call in. You still have not touched the reasons why there's a change. In your speech, you have not explained why the service is a lifeline. You still don't understand the challenges. I wish you would walk in my shoes or other educators' shoes and understand how every single day we conflict. We're like, okay, we see the need, but the services have to improve. The waitings on the NHS has to improve. We've got kids that have been waiting to be diagnosed for almost 3 years, Councillor Malcolm. You don't know what it feels like in those families. For hopefully, the programme and the new model that Ealing is trying to bring is all about serving those families. I know to everybody that's sitting here, it might look different because it's a new thing. We don't know. I personally cannot sit here and say, I know it's going to be perfect. Nobody can give us promises. But because there's a severe need and we are not looking at those disadvantaged family, I'm saying, please, let's understand the families who cannot speak for themselves that I have personally worked with every single day for the last almost 15 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haley. And I just think that speaks to the massive funding cuts since Sure Start's heyday, and since 2010, the funding cuts. And in Ealing, unlike most other local authorities, we've kept our children's centres open, but we've had to diminish the services within. Now we're trying to correct that. Give that now to Councillor Douglas.
Yeah, I think quite a lot of what I was going to say has already now been said, but I think I just wanted to talk about the survey quickly. It's been referenced quite a lot tonight that those in communities who are not using the children's centres didn't fill out the survey, and I think that proves the exact opposite of what they're trying to prove. It proves that the offer must change. We need to be reaching these people. We know we have an increased amount of families with children in need and on child protection plans. they're not accessing our children's centres, and those families are not being served by what we currently offer. We have children's centres that are open 1 day a week. We have ones that are just providing nurseries. And we've seen tonight evidence of how outreach works, how it brings families who need it in and to accept our help. So yeah, I will be commending this and not sending it back. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Douglas. Councillor Baccalini.
Thank you, Chair. As a mother of 4 children who, well, I have used the services many times over the past 25 years, specifically with my oldest son who has Asperger's syndrome. Unfortunately for him and myself and our family, we spent a very long time not even knowing what was wrong with my son, because the children's center that was just across the road from us was only open for 1 hour a day and did not at all offer any sort of special educational needs support. So it did leave us for like about 4 years up until he started primary school to get a proper diagnosis, just because we live on the border between Ealing and Brent. So he was one of those kids who weren't lucky enough to get the support that he needed. And I really, really hope that Councillor Malcolm, when he was talking about the equalities, I would like to ask Councillor Malcolm, what does he think about all these families who have children with special educational needs and who, up till today, do not get the support that their children deserve? Also, I would like to commend this new proposal, because I believe it would be not only early help for the children, but it will be early enough help for these children who really need the support and all these families struggling. Thank you.
Councillor Anand. Thank you, Councillor Baccalini.
Yes, I'd like to also say great work has been done, hard work, thanking Councillor Becker and the team who actually have worked on this. We do have a lot of changes that need to be done. Sometimes those changes are not going to be seen in the short term, but I really think that a lot of hard work is done in this report, and I see positive changes that are actually going to happen. So I will be also supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Anand. So members, I think I hear from the debate that members are minded to uphold the decision. So I'm going to move from the chair that the decision be upheld. Is that seconded?
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Moffat. So can I have a show of hands for all those in favour, please? In favour of the decision of upholding the decision, yeah. Sorry. Thank you.
Those against.
Did you get all that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And can I see those against, please? No abstentions? No. Okay, I think that's a clear decision in favour of upholding the report. Thank you very much. Can I just say thank you very much to all the members of the public who came tonight. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to officers, cabinet member and opposition members, and thank you to members of the panel. We'll just let the room clear and then we'll move on to item 6, unless anyone needs a toilet break before we start item 6. Everyone all right? Yeah. Thank you. We'll just take a few minutes for a comfort break if anyone needs one. 3 or 4 minutes. Right, are we ready to assume? Are we all back? Thank you.
But their names were all.
So we'll move on to item 6, the Scrutiny Annual Report 24-25. We need to agree it or not. Does anyone have any, or do you want to introduce it, Sam, first, and then if anyone has any comments?
Yeah, I'll be very brief. This is a summary of all the activity that happened last year across Scrutiny. Has been some continuity with chairs and some have changed. Those chairs that were chairing panels last year have been engaged with the drafting of the report. It's a very high level overview of all the stuff that Scrutiny's got up to, including all the recommendations that have been made. The idea is this will be taken to council in July for council to note, which is what's been suggested through the statutory guidance. I know from our training session that was held a few weeks ago that feedback from Scrutiny members, we wanted a bit more recommendation tracking. So I will be bringing an updated tracker of all the recommendations at the next meeting of this committee. So in case there was just preempting any questions there about response to recommendations, what I wanted to show in the report was these are the recommendations that were made. The impact will be shown through the tracking that will be coming forward. So happy to take any questions on the report, any suggestions for the future, for next year's report, or indeed things to include here, bearing in mind the deadline for council is Monday. So if you're asking for a large rewrite, that might not be doable, but any tweaks for this year and suggestions for next year, I'm more than happy to take those on board. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Does anybody have anything, or are we happy to agree the report as is? Agreed. Thank you all, and thank you all for your input into it as well. So I'll move on to item 7, the Scrutiny Work Programme 25-26, and Sam to introduce this as well, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. This is, all the committee chairs around the table, so you all know you've been working very hard on getting your work programmes together. As we talked about at the end of last year, putting the work programmes together is very much a collaborative process between the scrutiny chairs, officers, and increasingly we're trying to involve cabinet members in that process as well, because whilst scrutiny is independent from cabinet, we're all a team, right? Officers, members, backbench members, scrutiny members, cabinet members. I'm not going to propose any changes to it. I think it looks like a really good work programme. Really, the purpose for it coming to overview and scrutiny is responsible for the overall work programme of scrutiny. So you've all had a chance to look at the work programme. If you think there are any gaps, if you think there's anything that ought to be taken by a different committee, now's your time to mention, and we can take that on board, and the committee chairs around the table can have a think about that. It's not set in stone. It will change throughout the year. I always say that. As things come up, we can add them on. If things get delayed or need to be pushed back, we can do that as well. But it's just an early opportunity for the first scrutiny overview and scrutiny committee meeting of the year to feed in at this stage.
Thanks, Sam. Does anybody have any comments or suggestions at this stage? Councillor Anand?
Yes. Sam, its report's okay. I just want to ask you some clarity here. Quite a lot of work was done on youth crime and knife crime. Where in that this program, can we actually see that being highlighted? And is there any other further work that's going to take place? Thanks.
So are you, just for clarification, Councillor Anand, are you asking about an update on the recommendations and that was done previously on that? And you're also asking a question about whether there's going to be more work done, more this, yeah. All right. So it was 2 questions. Okay, so we'll deal with the updating any recommendations, taking it to the appropriate committee. Probably come to this one because if it was a panel, then there may not be a panel that is contiguous with this year, if you see what I mean. So I'll take that away and have a look and think of the best way to bring that back to you. In terms of the committee that was responsible for safer communities, there's a bit of a split. So Overview and Scrutiny Committee does take the Safe Reading Partnership report every year, as you know. If you had some particular questions around perhaps how the police and the council services deal with that, then that'd be your opportunity to ask that. But if you think there needs to be more focused item on that, then that sits in the housing and environment. No, have I got that wrong? Yeah, it's yours, is it? That's not yours. I'm trying. Right, let me think. No, it's under Nikki, isn't it? It's under Nikki. Yeah. There's no. Safety communities is housing and environment. Let me have a quick look, because yeah. No, yeah, community protection is housing and environment. So yeah. So if there's a request there to look at that in particular, then perhaps you could have a discussion offline with Councillor Hamidi to see what that might be, and she can raise it with the officers, and we can look to include that. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Are there any other comments or suggestions on the work programme? Happy to agree it?
Yes.
Yes, great. Okay, well, just like to say thank you all for all your contributions tonight, and thank you to Sam and Cornelia too, and all the officers that help us all the time. So thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.